This past May the 4th, we were treated to yet another entry to the Tales series, this time focusing on the so-called Imperial-centric characters, hence the name Tales of the Empire. But the main question I'm sure many of us had going into this is just how does it compare to last year's Tales of the Jedi? Episode 1, The Path of Fear. This is the start of Morgan Elsbeth's 3-episode arc, which begins with not only a visually magnificent battle sequence on Dathomir between the Night Sisters and the Separatists, but this new take of that battle seems far more brutal than ever, especially General Grievous's appearance in this episode, which is really dark and, might I say, perfect too? I kinda wish we got this scary Grievous in the Clone Wars because watching him here like this was just something else. But as for Morgan, this episode basically shows us how she survived the Seppi attack after witnessing her mother die. And then she ends up joining another witch clan, this being the so-called Mountain Clan, and well, for me everything after the initial battle sequence was pretty much, meh. Now, I'll be honest, I never cared for Morgan's character, but I was open to learning more about her. It's just that this episode didn't do any of that at all. Yeah, we see her mother die at the hands of Grievous and Morgan vows for revenge, but that's pretty much it, and that's nothing. Plus, later we know that she doesn't want to take revenge on Grievous, which from her perspective is the cause of all of this, so that already doesn't make any sense. But that's pretty much it, and that's nothing. For this episode to have been good in my opinion, I would have loved to see how Morgan, a human, ended up joining the Night Sisters in the first place, whom are all Dathomirian Zabraks, mind you. Same goes for her mom. I mean, it's no secret that among these female, pale, white-haired Zabraks, you randomly have 2 Asian human women part of their clan. And not only do they stand out like crazy, but you don't even bother to explain how they got there and why? I mean, you'd think such series like Tales would help explain and answer these questions to us, but nope. Not to mention, I also really did not like this introduction of this Mountain Clan, as it just canonically added that there are now randomly a bunch of humans also living on Dathomir too, literally right next door to the Dathomirian Zabrak Night Sisters. I mean, I'm super over having yet another planet in Star Wars now have a local human population living on it. It kind of loses some of that uniqueness that Dathomir as a planet had. Plus, with just having Morgan and her mom being part of Mother Talzin's clan, it just feels like Dave Filoni is trying to human-wash the Dathomirian Zabrak Night Sisters, and Dathomir in general now. Something that I'm definitely not in favor of. Also, I have to say I much prefer the aesthetic of the Mountain Clan from Legends more too than in canon, which were exactly like the Night Sisters, but more so being their rival clan, and they had their own interesting style too. Meanwhile, the canon Mountain Clan is full of humans wearing bland white clothing, making them look like some kind of peasant monks than actual witches. So, yeah, I'm a bit mixed on this episode. I absolutely love the beginning of it, but everything afterwards just made me roll my eyes and look at my watch. That said, I did much prefer it over the baby Ahsoka episode that we started off in Tales of the Jedi, which, well, isn't a hard feat to accomplish. Episode 2, The Path of Anger. Okay, so now we're going to even weirder territory, with it turning out that Morgan is somehow now the mastermind behind the TIE Defender and fails to sell that idea to the Empire. I seriously have no idea why Dave Filoni would retcon this, taking away Thrawn's baby away from him and randomly giving it to Morgan. Just because they need to make her more interesting, I guess. I don't know. Because really, how did Morgan, who went from being a Night Sister living with some monk ladies in a primitive land, suddenly become a starfighter designer? It makes zero sense. At best, my headcanon tries to reason this to just instead having Morgan pitching her ability to build the logistic network that would make production of the TIE Defender more feasible, as that seems to be her main strength, not aerospace engineering. But aside from that, the only other interesting parts here is showing us how Morgan met Thrawn. And while seeing Pelion and Rook was neat too, it just wasn't really enough to make me care much for this episode. It also seems that Morgan by this point had somehow taken over Corvus as well and has her own merc military force, which is yet another missed opportunity, as I'd much rather had this episode focus on Morgan first coming to Corvus and showing us how she'd won over the people first before conquering them, and as well how she got her merc forces, or heck, better yet, show us how maybe Morgan got her sweet Beskar spear. Now that would have been way more interesting in my opinion over whatever, or mostly whatever we got here. And on another note, but a distinct issue that I also had with this episode that I didn't like was the poor portrayal of Corvus in general, and it having, well, too much diversity and a lack of Asian villagers in it. No, seriously, just watch The Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 5, where Corvus was originally depicted as a place with mostly Asian inhabitants. Which made sense as the so-called leader was Asian, the whole town had this oriental aesthetic, especially Morgan's garden, which was just straight ripped off of something you'd see in Japan. And yeah, it made sense since that Mando episode basically was one mini samurai movie wrapped up in a Star Wars package. However, I felt that Corvus lost much of that Asian samurai identity here in Tales, where we see a lot more aliens living here, but also literally no Asian villagers other than Wing. Why? And this just absolutely was absurd in my opinion, and took a lot out of the unique character that Corvus once had. Episode 3, The Path of Hate. Alright, the final Morgan episode, and surprisingly, I didn't mind it too much. And well, as a matter of fact, I liked it for what it was, and well, that's mainly because it sees the involvement of the New Republic. Plus, I gotta say, I like the idea of a former Corvus citizen running away and then joining the New Republic, in order to one day come back and try to bring justice to Morgan, who's essentially enslaving the people there. Then again, coming back with only 5 guards and thinking Morgan will go down easily is anything but smart. And things, of course, end about as well as you'd expect with this level of intelligence. But hey, the firefight between the NR guards and Morgan's forces was entertaining. It was short, but yeah, still entertaining. And the ending was pretty dark and graphic. I did not expect that. The only real issue aside with only bringing 5 guards with you that I had in this episode was Morgan putting the forest on Corvus randomly on fire at the end, which was super weird. Because just, why would you do that in the first place? And how does that possibly help you? I mean, if anything, all those fumes from the burning forest will mess with your lungs. Not the brightest play for Morgan. Episode 4, Devoted. we're done with Morgan and now we're on to the long-awaited Barriss Offee's arc. And as expected, it's good and done well. We see Barriss's reaction to Order 66, and how she gets recruited into the Inquisitors, and surprisingly, she does so through the fourth sister, aka Lynn Rakish, which I found pretty cool. I always thought the fourth sister was one of the few good things that came from the Kenobi series, and because she barely had anything to do there, I was glad to see her take such an important role in Barriss's Inquisitor arc. But yeah, we always theorized and figured that Barriss would have become an Inquisitor after Order 66, as that always seemed like the natural thing for her to do, and I'm glad Filoni stuck with this idea. Anyway, everything else in the episode was done well, no real complaints whatsoever. It was great to see the Grand Inquisitor again, with him personally testing Barriss's skills, as well as little Squid Games-esque challenge where out of the chosen Jedi survivors present, only one can survive, and their prize is to become an Inquisitor. Plus the fact that this all takes place in the still-in-development Fortress Inquisitorius only added to the awesomeness of this episode. Other nice additions were the cameos of the Tales of the Jedi Inquisitor and Marok from Ahsoka. But I kind of wish we saw more of them, maybe some interactions of Barriss too. And most of all, more of Vader, which I feel was criminally underused here, having only 10 seconds of screen time and not saying a peep? So that was a bit of a bummer. Not a perfect episode by any means, maybe if it was longer then sure, but still a fairly strong one in my opinion. Episode 5, Realization. This one I had high hopes for. It started out pretty well, with Barriss going on what looked to be her first Inquisitor mission alongside the fourth sister. And this was already giving me flashbacks to, say, the Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn episode from Tales of the Jedi, or even the Elder episode from Star Wars Visions Season 1. And yeah, it did go quite well here too, at least halfway through. I loved seeing how fierce and nasty the fourth sister can get with the civilians holding back information on what sounds to be like multiple Jedi hiding out on this planet in the mountains, where she pretty much massacres an entire village for basically lying to her. And seeing this unfold right in front of her gives Barriss doubts on if the path that she's chosen was the correct one or not. Which, I mean, can you blame her? Then when they do find the Jedi hiding up in the mountains on this planet, it turns out that, hey, it's not multiple Jedi, but rather only one Jedi, which was a bit of a disappointment. I mean, with all of this they-them talk and referring to the Jedi in plural, I was at the very least expecting to see, 2 or 3 Jedi hiding up here, not just one. And well, here's also where things get controversial and less exciting too. Now, the real controversial moment we have in this scene for me is that the fourth sister quote-unquote kills the Jedi survivor. And by that, not really. I mean, she slices the guy up from the back with her lightsaber, which normally would, kill a person. But turns out that this Jedi survivor somehow survives this attack. Yeah, Jedi survivor, surviving attacks, yeah. And rather than finishing him off to make sure that he dies, which again is her prime mission and all, and whole reason to be here, as this is why she practically slaughtered a whole village for. Yet she shrugs her shoulders and prefers to leave him be, which I found very un-Inquisitor-like. Now, as for what I don't think is controversial is Barriss betraying her mentor, the fourth sister, right afterwards, and essentially quitting the Inquisitorius and saving the Jedi. And yeah, I've heard many folks have an issue with this, that this is very controversial, Barriss would not do this, blah blah blah. And I personally don't get what's all the fuss about. as just because Barriss was against the Jedi and thought what they were doing was wrong, in no way means that she's now suddenly a Darksider and wants to do the Sith's bidding. I mean, she's not good, but also not evil, or not evil enough to really fit in the Inquisitors long term and do all the heinous crimes that they do under Palpatine's name. I always just saw Barriss as a radicalized Padawan, which thought what she was doing was the right thing, and just against the Jedi way of thinking at the time due to the war and how that changed the Jedi. Which, I mean, she wasn't technically wrong, and now that the Jedi leadership was gone, then there was no real need for Barriss to continue being so anti-Jedi. Yeah, it made sense for her to be recruited into the Inquisitors, as from Palpatine's point of view, she would have been a great candidate as she did betray the Jedi. But at the same time, I feel it was never in her character to remain an Inquisitor for long, especially seeing how they're even much worse than how the Jedi acted. So the idea of her eventually leaving the Inquisitors made sense. But it's just the execution here, which was lame. Episode 6, The Way Out. This is the end of Barriss's arc right here, and it did not go the way I thought it would. As after some time has passed, which we don't know how much, but it couldn't be more than 10 years. And with Barriss now living out in the middle of nowhere, she looks to have aged terribly, and is now apparently some type of secret healer with 2 followers. Which, okay, but firstly, I wonder where the heck that Jedi that she buddied up with in the previous episode is at, as I assume both of them would have been sticking around with each other after such an experience that they both had. But turns out, no. Or the Jedi perhaps died, who knows. Anyway, it seems that the 4th sister after all of these years ends up tracking down Barriss. Well, actually not her per se, but rather the Force-sensitive baby that she was examining. But still, the 4th sister said that she would come after Barriss once she deals with the kid. Fair. And, well, I don't know. The first scene that shows that there is a dark figure approaching Barriss from the distance, I thought that might have been Vader. Because, well, how awesome would that have been, right? Barriss heard him as Anakin for her betrayal and lying about Ahsoka, and now she betrayed him as Vader. That's 2 for 2 on betrayals right there, so you'd think Vader would have taken this personally, right? But alas, unfortunately, this is not the case, and it's a shame in my opinion. And this coming from someone who actually likes the 4th sister. Now, Barriss has her followers take the kid and his parents through an icy cave in order to escape off-world from the 4th sister on a starship that's parked there. But the 4th sister attempts to follow them into the cave, and quickly ends up getting lost and trapped. She then freaks out and accidentally stabs Barriss in the process, whom it also seems like she was silently stalking her into the cave too, which we kind of get a breakthrough moment here with the 4th sister, who rather than letting Barriss die like she said was her previous intention, has her randomly rethink her whole life because, again, she stabbed someone unintentionally. That same someone that she was already planning to kill for years upon years. And if that already didn't make any sense, it's also not like these two really knew each other that well or were that close, making this all that much more strange. But yeah, the 4th sister now picks up Barriss and carries her out of the cave, leaving us to assume many things. One of which being that maybe the 4th sister has returned back to the light side. And after everything that she's done, and just because she did something that she intended to do just by mistake, it doesn't really make sense. And as for Barriss, the assumption here is that she ends up perhaps surviving this? Because hey, what's a lightsaber stab wound in Star Wars anyway these days, right? Sabine survived it once, Reva survived it twice, and the Jedi in the previous episode also survived it. So yeah, why can't Barriss too? Now, honestly, I will say that I found this episode to be the weakest out of all of the Barriss episodes, and I don't know, it's just all over the place. I'm not really sure what to feel or think when I'm watching this episode, and I kind of expected a different fate for Barriss, who went from such a cool and unique character in the Clone Wars to, whatever this is, a meek, suddenly aged pacifist healer who potentially dies in such a lame way. And oh yeah, no Vader here too. No bueno. Overall, the Tales of the Empire didn't hit the way I'd like it to. If anything, I'd say it was pretty weak aside from the great animation and music. I've already spoke about my problems with each episode, and out of all of it, I'd say only the beginning of episode 1, then episode 3 and 4, and I guess the beginning of episode 5 are what I liked. So while not a garbage fire by any means, it's also not great, to the point where I honestly just had way more enjoyment with Tales of the Jedi over this. And in my opinion, I feel had they just focused the series on actual Imperials, like, I don't know, perhaps showing us how Dedra ended up joining the ISB, or maybe Thrawn's forces first arriving on Peridea and how they spent their time there, and that would have been so much more cooler to see. Because I don't know about you, but I don't really consider Morgan or Barriss to be Imperials. Sure, Morgan is in cahoots with Thrawn, she really wants to be an Imperial, but never really is. She works from the outside, while Barriss is only an Inquisitor for a short time and never really was truly into it, unlike say Lynn, the fourth sister. While I'm still very grateful to see Barriss' story continue, even though I may not have been thrilled on how or where it ended up going, I also don't think that we should have sacrificed getting some hardcore Imperial stories in a series that's all about Imperials. Because hey, at least the Tales of the Jedi actually focused on, Jedi. This with Imperials, not so much. Once again, an awesome idea brought forward by Dave Filoni, but at the same time, also yet another hugely wasted opportunity.